Welcome to the University of Michigan Sound Support's 2023 Parent Webinar Summer Series. This is the third of 3 parent webinars we have for the summer. My name is Amanda McGuire, and I am the Sound Support Coordinator for the University of Michigan's Cochlear Implant Program Sound Support Program. As you may know, Sound Support is an outreach grant funded by the University of Michigan Department of Otolaryngology and Michigan Medicaid. The grant is designed to provide outreach and support to children with hearing loss and their families throughout Michigan. We've put together this series of webinars for parents due to the great responses we've had from past series. If you have any questions, please email Sound Support at oto-soundsupportci@med.umich.edu. Today's parent webinar is titled, Let's Get Ready for School, Teacher Consultant for the Deaf and Hard of Hearing Perspectives. I would like to take the opportunity to introduce our presenters for today, Janet Mainz, speech pathologist, and Dr. Gabrielle Watson. Janet is a teacher consultant for the deaf and hard of hearing at the Ingham Intermediate School District, and Dr. Gabrielle Watson is an audiologist at our Cochlear Implant Program. With that, I'll hand it over to Janet and Dr. Watson, and we'll get started.
Hi, my name is Gabrielle Watson. I'm an audiologist at the University of Michigan Cochlear Implant Program, and I'm happy to present the 2023 parent webinar, Ask Early On, TC DHH Perspectives, with Janet Mainz. So the purpose of our parent webinar today is just to give a brief overview of what early on services look like in the state of Michigan. And we have our distinguished guest, Janet Mainz, to talk about what early on services look like in Michigan. So we'll be giving some introductions. What is early on services? What is the process of early on, and then what transition services look like. So thanks so much for being with us today, Janet. So from that first introduction slide, I saw that you had quite a few letters behind your name. That's fantastic. So let's kind of dive in and talk about what those mean. So what is a TC DHH?
A TC DHH stands for a teacher consultant for the deaf and hard of hearing, and we service children from birth to age 26 in the state of Michigan, in the home and in the school districts.
Okay. And how long have you been a TC DHH for?
I have been a TC DHH for going on 10 years now.
Oh, wow, great. And I also saw the LSLS Cert AV Ed behind your name. What does that mean?
I am a listening and spoken language certified auditory verbal educator. So I work with children on developing their listening and spoken language.
Great. All right. So let's just dive into what early on is. So what is early on?
Early on is a Michigan's early intervention program designed to support families with children ages birth to age 3 with developmental delays and or established disabilities. And services are presented through a family coaching model. So we go into the home and we work with the family in helping their child learn skills that are necessary for their development and growth.
Okay, all right. I know we're talking about specifically kind of deaf and hard of hearing, but are those the only services that are provided?
No, often we work with a team of professionals to access a child or help a child develop their physical, their cognitive, their communication, their social, emotional, and their self-help skills.
Great. All right. So we talked about early intervention services. What do those all include?
Well, special education is primarily involved with implementing specially designed instruction. And for the teacher consultant for the deaf and hard of hearing, this starts with communication mode options, discussing that with the family. How do they want their child to learn and grow, and in what communication? And then we talk about language and speech skills, often during our visits, early advocacy skills, helping the child and the family learn to speak for themselves and use equipment appropriately, and talk about what their needs are. verbalize those. And then we also work with literacy. Every early on visit includes a book. So we bring a book or several, or use books that the families have to talk about growing their literacy skills so they're ready for school. And then very important is developing their auditory skills so they have access to everything that we're providing for them.
Great, great. All right, so let's talk about kind of the timeline for early on. So I imagine it's a process of kind of identifying that a child has a disability. So let's start from there.
Well, it's like a well-oiled machine. The referral process, the the child's family or an audiologist, a speech therapist can start a referral, and the initial service provider has 10 days to respond to a family. And then they start with an evaluation or an assessment with meeting the family within that 10 days and talking about what their needs are and trying to get an IFSP scheduled if appropriate. And then they have 45 days to initiate an IFSP, an individual family service plan. That includes, the evaluation, the assessment, and making a plan for the family, which includes outcomes and things that the service plan that the family and the child will need. And then starting the services occur within 30 days of that IFSP date. And that's when the service provider, like a teacher consultant for the deaf and hard of hearing, starts with an initial service coordination and home visits.
Okay, great. So you gave a beautiful overview there. So let's start at that referral process. Who places that initial referral? Does it have to be like a physician? Can it be the parents? Who puts in that initial one?
Anybody can place your referral, the family, the pediatrician, the audiologist, the speech therapist, a teacher consultant for the deaf and hard of hearing, a family friend.
Okay, that's great. I think when I talk to families about early on services, I'm more than happy to put in the referral for them. But I love knowing that parents who have concerns can place that referral themselves. So that's really cool. So who provides those early on services?
Early on has a wonderful group of professionals ranging from a teacher consultant for the deaf and hard of hearing to a teacher consultant for the visually impaired, social workers, occupational therapists that can all provide services based on what the child's needs are.
Okay. And who pays for those services? Are they free? Do they go through insurance? Are they out of pocket for the family?
All services are free, provided by the school.
Okay, great.
ISD.
All right. So I know you talked about the teacher consultant for the deaf and hard of hearing and just kind of starting that process. Who is on that initial early on team?
There are your early on team is I know how we do it in Ingham. We break it down into districts by for the county. And then each section of the county has an initial service coordinator, and she or he is the first person that the family meets, and they do the initial intake. Sometimes they will ask if they know the disability area or the developmental delay area of the child. They'll often ask the service provider that for that area to also come to that initial meeting. And then they have the service provider is the person that will take over from implementing the individual family service plan with the family. And that for the deaf and hard of hearing is the teacher consultant for the deaf and hard of hearing. The teacher consultant works very closely with our educational audiologist for our team, and she or he will often do evaluations and consultations with the child and with the family and with the teacher consultant.
Okay. So let's say we have a child who has another area of concern other than deaf and or hard of hearing. Who else can be on that team?
Well, the early on team is a very team-based approach to helping the whole child develop. So we might have a physical therapist, an occupational therapist, a speech language pathologist, social worker, a teacher, a consultant for visually impaired. There also might be a school psychologist on that plan as well.
Okay, great. So it's like the whole team,
The
there.
whole team, whatever the child needs is we try to service them.
Very good. All right. So you talked about that evaluation that the educational audiologist is doing. What are those evaluations and who's completing them?
The initial service coordinator does the initial evaluations and assessments, and she or he looks at the whole child. So she does assessments to look at all of their developmental areas. And then she or he likes to have the child present during the evaluation so she can, look at how the child responds to the family during interactions, has questions for the family. And then if possible, she will ask the service provider to also come to that initial service coordination meeting with the family so that that person can also do more specialized evaluations related to the child's disability area.
Okay, all right. So you mentioned kind of in that overview of the timeline that once that service provider and that service coordinator do the assessments, what happens next?
And then once we determine if the child has a disability or developmental delay, we instigate or institute the IFSP plan. And that includes plans for, thank you, it's a part of the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. And the child that qualifies for an IFSP is a child with a, like I said, developmental delay or an established condition like a hearing loss. And the IFSP is a plan worked with the family. It's really important to know that it's family driven, what the family's needs are, the child's needs, and we're meeting the child and the family where they're at. And so we complete the plan and we talk about all of the developmental areas, of course, but we also focus on usually the outcomes, which are family driven. So of whatever the family would like their child to be able to do within a 6-month, 12-month period. And we develop strategies and how to develop that, how to help the child meet those needs. And then we talk about how often a service provider will be coming into the home and who will be coming into the home.
Okay. Can you give an example of on how that is family driven? So you have a family who has chosen that they want to pursue like a listening and spoken language path for their child. Like, what would that look like?
So based on the evaluations that we conduct, we discuss those with the family, and that's our starting point. And so if a family would like their child to be able to express their needs and wants for, let's say, food items. So they might say, I want my child to be able to ask for a glass of milk, or I want my child to be able to articulate a book they want to read. So we might make an outcome about how a child will develop, be saying 1 to 2 words by the time they're, in a 12-month period. We might also break it down by sounds. A child might be able to speak or articulate the initial consonant sounds that a typical child will develop in a certain time frame. And then we talk about how we will do those. How we will establish that, accomplish that.
Very cool. So once we have you have a child who's deemed eligible for services, how long does it take for early on services to start for that family?
So once a family has an IFSP, then the initial service, or I'm sorry, then the service provider has 30 days to make contact with the family and do their initial visit. It usually does not take 30 days from that IFSP date, but yes, they have the 30-day.
Yeah, so we're back to that whole timeline where we started with the referral, meeting with the family, making the plan, and then initially starting that services. So how long do you think that whole process would take?
Maximum, 85 days, but it doesn't usually take that long.
Oh, okay. Doesn't really. Cool. All right, so starting services. Where do these services typically take place?
They take place most often in the family's home, but sometimes we might meet at a park, we might meet at a library. It's family driven. So whatever the family decides is the most appropriate place. The whole goal of early on is for the family's intervention to happen where the child most often spends their time.
Very good. So it could be at like a daycare setting, it could be like at a library, things like that.
Yes.
Awesome, awesome. And how long does a child receive those services for?
A child receives services for as long as the parents would like it or the caregivers would like services. Also, a child can receive services until the team decides that they don't need them anymore. Sometimes they just need early on for a short time. Sometimes they need it for a long time. And that is not taken lightly. It includes an evaluation, assessments, and a collaboration with the team, the whole team, the family, the child, the service provider, and any other participants. Or it could end when the child turns 3
Okay,
and they're in school.
so if a child is turning 3, and it's looking like they still need services, what kind of happens with that process? If you find that they still need those services after they turn 3.
So that's a very comprehensive process. Again, that is really important to make sure the child's needs are met. So this process starts way back when they're 2.5 or even sooner if appropriate. And it starts with opening a read. And this is a review of existing evaluation data. So the family and the service provider opens this read. And that's when they talk about what evaluations, if any, that they need to gather more information about the child's needs. And then we go into the evaluation and the sometimes other team members, like we mentioned, the physical therapist or the occupational therapist or the speech therapist might join this evaluation team from early on. And we evaluate the child based on their needs and family concerns.
Is there
And
any cases where you have to like consult like a group that wasn't a part of that initial early on team?
yes, because sometimes things come up during your home visits and the parent concerns change. And so we will bring in other professionals doing consults, and audiologists too are a very important part of the evaluation team. And then we assemble a team. We're adding now after the evaluation process. Now we're ready to go to an IEP meeting, an individualized education plan meeting. But before that, we add team members from the local school district. That might include a special education director, the local district's teacher consultant for the deaf and hard of hearing, the educational audiologist, the speech therapist. Anybody else that did an evaluation is typically there on the other end, that there is a person that matches their qualifications.
Okay. And kind of going back to a previous question, like where do these services take place once the child is older than 3? Are they still taking place in the home? Does it still have that flexibility of having other locations?
Once a child turns 3 and they are enrolled in a preschool program or drive-in services, the services are now at the school district in which the family resides.
What are drive-in services?
Drive-in services are if sometimes a speech therapist or a teacher consultant for the deaf and hard of hearing or educational audiologist meet the child and the parent at a school in the school district to provide the services. For some reason, if the child is not going to preschool, but they still need services.
Nice, nice. All right. So, I have a question for you. So, what would you say to a family who was recently diagnosed with hearing loss and they have like a lot of these appointments scheduled for them with like the audiologist, the ear, nose, and throat physician, and then someone says early on services. Like, what would you want them to know about early on, and if they're wondering if they should enroll in early on?
Well, they can start by calling to have make contact with an early on professional. So they could call 1-800 early on, or they can make a referral themselves online by going to that website on the screen. They can also consult other resources like the thank you for hearingfirst.org, AG Bell, the AG Bell Association, the Michigan Early Hearing Detection and Intervention Program, or Michigan Hands and Voices, to gather more information. And they also are able to access other families through these organizations that might be able to help them through this process as well.
Great. Well, Janet, I want to thank you so much for your time and teaching us about what early on services look like in the state of Michigan. If you have any questions, you can reach out to our Odo Sound Support email if you have any questions for sound support or for Janet. Thank you again for your time.
Thank you.